Hi everyone. This is for chapters 1 through 3 of Dorian Gray. I'm just going to go over very briefly some of the stuff that happened in the chapters and also discuss the questions and kind of give you some ideas of what you might want to answer those with. So, number one, we got 3 chapters here. I talked a little bit about the preface in the aesthetics video. Chapter 1 is a discussion and a meeting between Lord Henry and Basil. And by the way, his name is pronounced Basil. He's not an herb. So the two of them discuss things a lot to do with art, but they also discuss Basil's newest model, who is Dorian Gray. And Dorian Gray is young. Basil and Lord Henry, I would say, are both probably in their mid-30s, so they're older than Dorian, although you shouldn't picture them as exceptionally old. Whereas Dorian, I believe, is 18. Or is he 16? Can't really remember, and that's not that important. So he's young. I think he's 18. Anyway, Dorian Gray is young and very good looking. Basil obviously feels drawn to him for some reason. If you are noticing that there seems to be more of a connection there than what you would normally feel to a friend, you are not the only person who has noticed that. And that's what we would call homoerotic subtext. There is definitely some of that in this novel. And again, that was used in Oscar Wilde's trial against him. However, in the beginning, there's a lot of discussion of art. There's a lot of discussion about Dorian. Basil thinks Dorian is wonderful and also that he is innocent. And he doesn't want him to meet Lord Henry because he thinks Lord Henry is a corrupting influence. In chapter 2, Dorian shows up and Lord Henry does meet him, takes him away from Basil, goes out into the garden, and they talk about a lot of things. Lord Henry and Dorian just discuss life and art and all sorts of different things. Dorian does seem somewhat innocent, but also Dorian seems very interested and attracted and drawn to what Lord Henry says, if not Lord Henry himself. And so then we have a connection there. And then in sorry for any break there. In chapter 3, we have Lord Henry talking with his great uncle, and he is discussing Dorian, looking into his background. And then we also have a dinner where Lord Henry and Dorian and some other people all get together and talk about a lot of different things. I will mention in that one, if you're a little confused about why they keep talking about American women, that's more of that situation where American women had a lot of money. So aristocrats who didn't have a lot of money left but still had a title would marry somebody American who had quite a bit of cash. Anyway, let's look through the questions here on the screen, and I'll just give you a little information and some ideas about how to answer them. Remember, you're doing a well-developed academic paragraph, which is 5-7 sentences, and you're going to have at least one, preferably 2, direct quotes from the text to support whatever you're saying. So, number 1, is Basil a comment on art or a reflection of Wilde? You can look at that either way, and you could also, if you chose, look at Lord Henry, and say whether Lord Henry or Basil is more representative of Wilde's personality, or are they just a comment on art and how artists work. Number 2, explain how Dorian's characterization suggests that he is a manipulator. How does Dorian manipulate people? Especially, I would focus on Basil at this point. Now, later in the novel, that might be a little different, but for now, he does seem to manipulate Basil in certain ways with his behavior. I wouldn't say he's manipulating Lord Henry yet, in particular, but you could also look at how Lord Henry manipulates people if you prefer, and that's an option too, because he definitely manipulates both Dorian and Basil. Number 3, provide some justification that the importance and power of beauty in relation to the intellect and the soul and the fleeting nature of beauty are concepts introduced in the first chapter. Think about how they talk about beauty, how they talk about what is beautiful. In Basil's case, a lot of times that's Dorian, but in Lord Henry's case, it might be just general things. Think about also the setting. But especially in chapter 1, you're in an artist's studio. What are they saying about beauty? What are they saying about intelligence and beauty? All those things are discussed pretty substantially. Number 4, in what way does Lord Henry affect Dorian's character? Why does Lord Henry choose Dorian as his disciple, and what impels Dorian to follow his guidance? What is it that Dorian fears? So if we start at the end here, Dorian definitely fears getting older, right? We know that from chapter 2. But we can also look at, why is Dorian so drawn to Lord Henry? And why is Lord Henry drawn to Dorian? What exactly is the connection between them? Why do they like each other? You can go a couple different ways on that. And how is Lord Henry affecting Dorian? Is he corrupting Dorian as Basil feared? And why, if that's the case, would he want to do something like that? So, a lot of those things they talk about in chapter 2 would work really well there in their discussion in the garden. Number 5, look at the passage in chapter 2 where Dorian makes his wish. Deconstruct this passage. What are the most important phrases? What is the subtext? What meaning is constructed through the discourse? So when we're talking about deconstructing, you're taking the language apart and you're looking at specific phrases, specific words, what they mean, and how they work together. So you would look at where he makes his wish that he wouldn't age, but the painting would. And what are the important phrases there? And the subtext is, what is that hinting at? Is there something below the surface that they're trying to get at there? Is it something, why is Dorian afraid to age? What might this suggest he's afraid of, besides just the act of aging? What about it scares him? That's all stuff you could explore in the subtext. And if you're talking about how meaning is constructed through the discourse is the discussion back and forth between Lord Henry and Dorian. So how does that discussion create meaning? And then finally, number 6, do some research to ensure that you understand the story of Faust. Predict how it could connect to this story. That one's relatively simple, but it would require a little extra looking up on your part. You can look up either Faust or Dr. Faustus, which is just this word with a US at the end. Both those are versions of the Faust legend. It's a Germanic legend about a doctor who sells his soul to Satan in exchange for intelligence, power. It depends on the version, but anyway, usually for something to do with great intelligence and power. In the end of the story, in some versions, Faust is dragged to hell, and in other versions, he repents and is allowed to die but go to heaven. So you could look at that story and connect it in some ways to this one. How do you think the two might connect? Certainly, Oscar Wilde would have been familiar with Faust and his exploits, so that is something that might also connect to the story, and you could make that connection if you want. If you're going to do that one, you don't need quotes from Faust, but you would want to reference specifically what from that would connect with Dorian Gray. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch, email me, or get in touch some other way.